In the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
why does God have entire people groups killed? Some have called this genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And the question on that is, why would a loving God call for that?
You're a parent, right?
I am. I think you asked me that earlier on.
Yeah, I did ask you that earlier on.
2 kids.
So let's say that someone was trying to hurt your son or your daughter, and not just hurt, they were trying to corrupt them in a way that their eternal destiny would be, they would not only reject God, but they'd begin to follow a different way. How would you respond to the folks that did that?
Not very kindly. I might take them out.
Maybe. So one of the things we have to realize, as we're reading through the Old Testament, a lot of times folks will focus in on these passages and they'll say, well, look how mean God is. He says to wipe out all these people and all this stuff. You have to remember, this is generations of folks who have rejected God. Not just said, oh, I'm not going to believe him, but have gone so far as they worship pagan gods. And so when the Israelites come into the land, God knows that these other nations, their whole goal is going to be to corrupt the Israelites and to lead them astray. They've already rejected God, and they've rejected him, and they've rejected him, and they've rejected him. And there are consequences for that, right? So there's consequences in time and in eternity. So when I continually reject God and I keep pushing him further and further and further away, their judgment does come. There's a time when God says enough's enough, and that's the time. And so you had generations of folks. So you think of Cain's line, wiped out the flood, but they kept going further and further and further and further from God. And so when, after the Tower of Babel, once again, men began to increase on the earth, but they've rejected God. And so as they spread out, they're no longer showing God's image. They're no longer worshiping the God who created them. Now they're worshiping their own imaginations and the gods that they've made up. And so they've rejected God to such an extent. And maybe we can kind of fathom that today when you look at our culture and you look at not only do we live in a time when people have rejected the idea that there is even a God, but they might even be willing to say there is, but he's not a good God, or he's not a righteous God, or he's not. And so then they begin to twist who God is, and they begin to corrupt that. And there's judgment on that. And the thing is, when you get to Romans, we went through the book of Romans, Paul says that the wrath of God is already on humans, right? It's already on us, and that's because of the fall, right? So we're all under judgment, all under condemnation because of the fall. And so there's not a one of us that can say we deserve to be saved. There's not a one of us that could say we're good enough or whatever. So when you look at these nations, you can go, well, why didn't God just save them, or why didn't he do something different for them? We don't know exactly what their testimony was. We don't know exactly how God did it. But we do know that God is a loving God. We know that he is a gracious God. We know that he's a merciful God. We know his patience with the Israelites. He pursued them over and over and over again, even though they rejected him over and over and over again. We know in our own lives how many times that we reject God in our own hearts. We know how many times we sin against him over and over and over again, and yet he's merciful and he's gracious and he pursues us. And so when we get caught up on the question of, well, why did these people get killed or those people get killed, the temporal thing, the reality is every person who walks this planet will die.
1-to-1 ratio, right?
1-to-1. And it may be a bloody, gory death, or it may be peacefully as you're sleeping, but every one of us will die. The question is, will you have trusted in God before that happens? What will you do with Jesus? And so for folks who wrestle with that, it's, okay, so if I could satisfactorily answer that question for you, would you trust in God? And most of the time, you'll find that's a smoke screen. We all know that there is such thing as justice. We all know that when when wicked and evil things happen, that if they're left unchecked, it just continues to grow. It doesn't get better and better. It gets worse and worse and worse. Again, look at our society today. And so for God as a father over these Israelites, as he's bringing them into land, he's saying, okay, I'm going to protect my kids. And one of the ways I'm going to protect my kids is I don't want those influences that are going to lead them astray. And so as you go in, you're to wipe them out. Now, we also see examples in the Old Testament where folks who were enemies of Israel. One of my favorite stories is of Naaman the Syrian, right? The Syrians were the ones, they were attacking Israel. They were decimating them. And one of the little Jewish girls that gets taken, you talked about slavery before, gets captured by the Syrians. And she knows that Naaman, he's a commander, so he's high up in the army. He has leprosy. And she said, oh, I wish that you would go talk to the prophet in Israel and be healed. And so Naaman goes and he talks to the king, and the king is upset because he's trying to pick a fight. He wants me to heal him, and I can't heal him. And Elisha says, send him to me. And he meets with Elisha. Elisha tells him to go wash in the river 7 times in the Jordan. 7th time he comes up, no more leprosy. And so Naaman, then you have this scene where he comes back to Elisha, and when he comes back to him, he brings all these gifts. Elisha says, I won't take anything from you. And he says, then at least please let 2 mule loads of dirt be given to me. Because he said, I won't worship any other gods than the God of Israel. He said, I know there's only one God. And even when I go into the temple with my master and he leans on my arm and I have to bow down in the temple with him, the Lord forgive me in that instance. And Elisha says, go in peace. And so you have this beautiful picture of here's someone who's a pagan over here who comes to faith. The story of Ruth the Moabitess is another one. And so you have these stories in the Old Testament of people who came into contact with God's people. And when God's people were doing what they should have been doing as far as loving on people and representing God well, then people came to faith. So,
okay. The number 7 was in that story again, too.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay. So, where was Jesus for the 3 days between his death and resurrection?
Man, you know where you get in trouble?
Where do I get in trouble? Asking you these questions?
When you start to speculate on what the Bible doesn't say.
Okay.
The Bible doesn't tell us. It's not clear. So apparently none of the gospel writers thought that was important. The important thing was he rose on the 3rd day. He defeated death. And he brought new life. So whether or not there's that Carmen song where he goes down and he's having this boxing match with Satan,
with the
or
devil.
whether he's, we don't know for sure. Could he have gone to the abode of the dead to set free all of the Old Testament saints and brought them out into paradise? We don't know for sure. When he talks in Luke chapter 16, I believe, he's talking about Abraham's bosom, and he talks about the rich man Lazarus. Well, when Lazarus dies, he goes to this place called Abraham's bosom, and so there's already a separation between where Lazarus had gone and the rich man had gone. Now, some people say, well, that's the good part of hell and that's the bad part of hell, and so he just came to get the people out of the good part of hell. Maybe. I don't know, but for some reason, Paul doesn't feel a need to make that clear. None of the gospel writers seem to feel a need to make that clear. What's clear is that Jesus died on a cross, that he was buried, and that he rose on the 3rd day.
I think because it's Apostles' Creed where it talks about he descended into hell. I mean, is that where we get a lot of that?
Sometimes, and sometimes that's, the whole nativity scene where the wise men are there at the same time that the shepherds and the angels
Right.
are there. We kind of conflate different stories, and we read something and we jump to the conclusion that that's part of the Bible too. And it's, It could have happened that way, but again, we get into the realm of speculation, and when we get into that realm of speculation, that's a dangerous place to be.
So he died and rose again. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing.
That's the important thing. Yes.
Okay, here's one. Be careful how you answer this one now. Okay. Do pets, animals go to heaven, and do pets or animals have souls?
Only dogs go to heaven. Cats go to heaven.
I knew that.
I'm sorry.
I said be careful how you answer this one.
No. Animals do not have souls. They cannot be saved the way we are. But I would say, when I think about the new heavens and the new earth, that when God created this earth, that he created the animal kingdom, right? That it says on the sixth day that out of the ground he created all of the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, brought them to the man to seat the man to call him. That part of God's good creation, when he called good, were animals. And so in the new heavens and the new earth, I can't, again, you get in the realm of speculation,
right,
but I can't imagine why part of his good creation he wouldn't have there.
Right.
A removal of the curse, so you wouldn't have the animosity that you see between the animals, but you would, the lion lying down with the lamb, the cats and dogs living together, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, they can't be saved, but they might be there.
They might be there. There's not a reason for them not to be there.
Not a reason.
Not a reason. Okay, well, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of How Then Shall We Live?
All right.
This was the hot seat for you. These were cold questions.
These were cold questions.
You didn't know what was coming next. So again, if you guys do have any questions for Pastor Matt that you would like him to answer, you can put them in the comments down below, or you can send us an email at connectedcentralchristian.org. Be sure to like, subscribe, and again, drop a comment, hit that little notification button, all the things that everyone asks you to do on YouTube channels. I'm going to ask you to do that now. Thank you again, Pastor Matt.
Thank you, Myron.
And we will see you next time.